Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It's Thursday, September 26, 2013. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. We have a lot of stuff to talk about today. It's a very, very busy news day. Phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. 800-313-9443. Manny's sitting in our control room, his hand hovering over that phone handset, ready to just pounce on down the moment you call in with your commentary and questions and observations about what's going on. Obviously, right now on Capitol Hill, the big debate is the raising or not of the debt ceiling, the attempt to link it to the funding of Obamacare, which passed in the House, failed in the Senate. Now they're looking at a compromise position of possibly putting off the start of Obamacare for 1 year, and that's a very good idea, because what we're hearing from the people who developed this computer system that is supposed to be in all these exchanges and up and running on October 1st is it is not anywhere near close to being ready. The closer and closer they get to the deadline and trying to turn it all on, the more and more problems they're finding. It is a classic government Charlie Foxtrot, $88 million and just not really working. Not working any better than the F-22 or the F-35 or the Bradley Infantry Fighting Vehicle. It's another classic U.S. government screw-up here. Now, Boehner is insisting that he will not agree to a debt ceiling increase without spending cuts. They're all out there now spending cuts. And, of course, Obama is saying he won't negotiate with Republicans over raising the limit. He says, yes, you just have to do it. That's all there is out there. And Boehner said, it doesn't work that way. The president has to come to an agreement with the Congress. And Boehner is saying we're pushing for major, major spending cuts. And in theory, I'm in agreement. Let's start by cutting the National Security Agency, who are not only violating the Constitution by spying on us all and destroying America's reputation around the globe by spying on everybody else, but they failed to prevent the Boston bombing and the Kenya mall attack, which is their supposed justification for all this unconstitutional activity. Think of all the billions and billions of dollars poured into all that gigantic spying infrastructure, and it didn't work. And then let's cut the TSA, which after a decade of looting luggage and spreading sexually transmitted diseases as they grope from crotch to crotch to crotch, generally wrecking the tourist industry, they have yet to actually find a single real terrorist. Now, while we're at it, we could cut the BATF, which is unconstitutionally infringing on American Second Amendment rights, while at the same time giving assault weapons to Mexican drug cartels. And we could save a huge bunch of cash, ending all these bailouts and subsidies to save Wall Street from the mess their own crimes and greed created. In fact, I want to stop here and ask a very, very simple question. Why are we talking about a debt ceiling to begin with? Why is the U.S. government borrowing money from a privately owned central bank at interest, when Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution grants the government the authority to create their own money interest-free? Why do we even need a privately owned central bank issuing the public currency as a loan at interest, when the original model for the U.S. economy was the public currency issued by the government as a public utility? Does Congress want to make us all debt slaves of the private central bankers? If they do, there's a good reason to warm up the tar and start plucking the chickens right there. We don't need a Federal Reserve to create our money. The Constitution says the government is allowed to create their money, spend it into circulation, let it flow through commerce without accruing any interest at all. Why are they not doing that? Because the Federal Reserve Act, which I hold as having been unconstitutional right from the start, does not explicitly repeal Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. It is still in force. If the government has run out of money, they're under no obligation to go on borrowing it from the Federal Reserve, which is just creating it out of thin air. Let the government create it out of thin air, and at least we're not paying all this interest to the private bankers. Does that make any kind of good fiscal sense at all? Then we have all those billions that are being paid to Israel, which is a nuclear-armed state and does not need U.S. taxpayer dollars to protect itself. In any event, all that money going to Israel is illegal under the Symington Amendment to the U.S. Foreign Appropriations Act and under the Glenn Act, because Israel is a nuclear-armed state which refuses to sign the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty or allow IAEA inspections. And, of course, the biggest place where we should be talking about spending cuts is the war machine. The U.S. spends more on mass debt than the next 26 nations combined. And trillions of dollars are vanishing out of our pockets and being used to create things that go bang and then destroy themselves. Might as well just pile the money up in a big pile and set fire to it. Our military policy of using invasion to force the world back onto Bretton Woods is already failing. Nations are dropping the U.S. dollar faster than the U.S. can invade them. And as for the U.S. constantly making war on Israel's enemies, that too is a failed policy, as Israel is making enemies faster than the American kids can kill them. And it's destroying America's moral leadership in the process. Now, of course, we know that's what should happen. But what Boehner means by spending cuts, he means cuts to the things those Americans think they're paying taxes for, like good roads, good schools, good hospitals, a sturdy, well-maintained infrastructure, and government oversight of toxic additives in our medicines and foods, and certainly government oversight over the out-of-control financial sector. Those are where the cuts will be made, because Congress loves war. Congress loves Wall Street. Congress loves Israel and views no sacrifice by the American people that's too great to serve those particular masters. We're going to grab a phone call here. Barrett in Texas. Aloha, Barrett. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi. Last time I called, I was in Oregon. So I'm from Oregon. I'm starting to pick up the Texas drawl a little bit.
Okay.
You can't help it. But there's it's not really a movie. It's a documentary. It's called Innocence Betrayed. I don't know if you've ever heard of that.
Oh, yes, I've seen it. We've linked to it many, many times, and it shows basically, it documents in very graphic terms how it is gun control that leads to increased crime and violence.
Well, not just guns, but in all the different countries, it could be like machetes and stuff. They would take it, and then they would kill those people after they disarmed them. And another, for people who just think you have two heads when you try to explain to what's going on in this world right now, they look at you like you got two heads or you're a nutcase. Have them watch Aaron Russo's Freedom to Fascism. Anybody can get that. He was a professional, he was a lot of things. I mean, he made Eddie Murphy's...
he was a producer. He made Trading Places. He made Bette Midler's The Rose. And, right. He was a guest on our show shortly before he passed away. And, right. Freedom to Fascism should be on everybody's resource disk to hand out to their friends.
For beginners I think we all have two heads. That's all I'm saying. That was my comment.
Okay, well, I'm looking at Innocence Betrayed right now, and I'm going to go ahead and link it to the front page of What Really Happened. We've had it there before, but you're right. Great. It's time to reprise it.
Yes, thank you.
All right, you got it there. All righty, interesting article coming out of Ex-Republic TV about how the U.S. government is already over their previous debt ceiling. And we've commented on this before. The way the Treasury Department has kept the U.S. government debt below that previous debt ceiling is they have called off payments into the federal employee pension funds. They're now stealing from their own employees to try and keep below the debt limit. And so for all of you people out there who are monitoring this show and my website on behalf of your federal government masters, they're screwing you too. They really, really are. You ought to pay attention to that. Article coming out of the Wall Street Journal saying that the U.S. is in fact running out of cash more quickly than previously expected. They're just spending with wild, reckless abandon. Because they're not the ones who have to cough up the cash. They figure they're going to get it from you, and they don't understand yet we are tapped out. There is nothing left out here for them to grab to balance the books. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And before we went to the break, you were talking about this story coming out of the Wall Street Journal about how the U.S. is running out of cash even faster than had been thought only a few weeks ago. And they're screaming, we must raise the debt ceiling, raise the debt ceiling. And I want to go back and I want to reprise that question I asked in the first segment because I want everybody thinking about this and I want everybody out there talking about this to their friends and neighbors. Why is the government borrowing money at interest from a privately owned central bank when the Constitution specifically grants Congress the authority to issue all money interest-free? Now, the Federal Reserve is just creating this money out of thin air and then loaning it at interest. Why doesn't the government create that money out of thin air and just spend it into circulation and allow it to circulate without accruing interest? Nobody really has a good answer for that other than that's what the private central bankers wanted. It's what they had at the Bank of England. It's what they've got at the European Central Bank. It's what they've got at the IMF and the World Bank. And all these scamming private central banks who have the cash to bribe the government to sell their people into debt slavery to these bankers. That's the only reason it exists. And awareness of this is nothing new. In fact, I want to read you a quote here. If our nation can issue a dollar bond, it can issue a dollar bill. The element that makes the bond good makes the bill good also. The difference between the bond and the bill is the bond lets money brokers collect twice the amount of the bond and an additional 20%, whereas the currency pays nobody but those who contribute directly in some useful way. It is absurd to say that our country can issue $30 million in bonds and not $30 million in currency. Both are promises to pay, but one promise fattens the usurers and the other helps the people. That was Thomas Edison writing in the New York Times, December 6, 1921. Just a few years after the creation of the Federal Reserve, and the nation's finest minds already knew it was a disaster in the making. Now, as I mentioned before, the Constitution authorizes Congress to issue and control all money. Article 1, Section 8, Congress shall have the power to coin money, regulate the value thereof. Now, when the United States was founded, the money was the coinage, because the coinage held metal of value. That's where the value was. The paper notes were claim checks. So instead of carrying around 1,000 of these very heavy silver coins, you had a simple piece of paper, but it was a claim check. It wasn't the money itself. And I mention that because what we get from the money junkies is saying, well, the Constitution says the government can create the coinage, but not the rest of the money. That's the province of the private bankers. No, it isn't. Because when that was written into the Constitution, the metal content of the coins was the money. And the paper was just a claim check, but the government had the right to issue those claim checks as well. Now, Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution has never been repealed. It grants to Congress and the presidents the ability to order the Treasury to issue a public currency that operates free of interest to the private central bankers. Most recently, John F. Kennedy did it under Executive Order 11110. 5 months later, he was shot dead in Dealey Plaza, Dallas, Texas. We're coming up on the 50th anniversary of that. And on the Warren Commission sat John J. McCloy, president of the Chase Manhattan Bank, president of the World Bank, and I don't care how good a banker he is not qualified to be sitting on a body that is supposed to be investigating the murder of a U.S. president. So his purpose there was to make sure that the financial motives for the assassination never surfaced. Oh, it was this crazed lone nut in the Texas School Book Depository. He had ELF weapon written on his gun. He was crazy. He was wacko. We don't need to look any further than that. Now, if Congress knows they have the legal authority to issue interest-free money for the use of the people, and they do, they have to, then they are intentionally plunging we, the people, into debt slavery to those private bankers when they raise the debt ceiling and borrow more from that private central bank that is simply creating that loaned money right out of thin air. Now, one more point. Since it is the Constitution that granted the authority to create the money to Congress and did not provide for that authority to be delegated or transferred, I would argue that only a constitutional amendment would allow that money creation authority to be transferred from the Congress to a privately owned central bank. And as such, the Federal Reserve Act is unconstitutional and illegal, and all interest paid to that illegal central bank over the last 100 years is null and void. We, the people, are owed a refund for all interest paid to the Federal Reserve out of our taxes over the last 100 years. And if that volume of cash were dumped on the people, boy, the economy would be cured overnight. We'd all be up to date on our mortgages. We'd all be up to date on our credit cards. We'd be down at the malls getting ready for the Christmas shopping season, buying all kinds of manufactured goods. We'd be buying new cars. But when you starve a society of currency in the name of servicing artificially created debt, you reach a point where the economy starts to lock up. Because the currency, the money, is all in the hands of the money junkies, and they're not letting it out. Unless they're buying 150-foot yachts or something like that. And that's what's going on here. We're seeing retail is suffering. We're coming up on the earnings report for the third quarter of this year, and the rumors are it is going to be a disaster. Meanwhile, over at Investment Watch blog, Andy Kaufman is out there saying that talk of tapering quantitative easing is itself tapering. They're now accepting the fact that it is this instantly created $85 billion a month poured onto Wall Street that is the only thing holding the stock market together. And we were reminded of that last week when the Federal Reserve announced they were going to continue quantitative easing, and the stock market went right through the roof. And apparently there was some insider trading that took advantage of that. But that's the whole point. That underscored for everybody that the stock market is being held up by these constant cash injections. They can't stop it. They can't slow it off. The stock market is literally on life support from the Federal Reserve, and all of that money is considered technically a loan to the American people, to be paid from future tax revenues from your great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren. Now, over in Britain, they've had a technical glitch, supposedly, which has brought their operations to a halt. They're insisting that all transactions will be covered. They don't have to worry about that. And apparently, Nationwide's online banking had a glitch that showed all savings accounts as completely empty. Now, I'm wondering how you would have a glitch that would show everybody's account as empty at the same time, and why they're tinkering with the code. Are they getting ready for a virtual 911 as the upcoming false flag? And at this point, it's pretty obvious there's going to be some kind of a false flag. They're practically broadcasting it with neon signs. Terror attack coming to the United States. Be prepared to swear fealty to the U.S. government and the Federal Reserve, or the terrorists are going to get you. Alrighty. Anyway, let's talk a little bit about Obamacare, because while I would like to see Obamacare go away completely, I am willing to go along with this proposed compromise position of delaying its implementation by 1 year, if for no other reason than the computer system that the government spent $88 million creating isn't working, and it is not ready to go into operation on October 1st. Period. End of discussion. Seeing a story, and we've seen this many times before, this is over at Breitbart.com, where this family down in Kentucky saw their insurance costs triple overnight in order to be in compliance with Obamacare. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And boy, talk about your ironic timing coming back from the commercial. Fox News was running a segment where the White House has issued a statement saying that really the increase in premiums caused by Obamacare, it's not really that bad. It's not as bad as everybody's making out. They're basically saying, yeah, your costs are going to go up, but it's not that bad. Apparently, Obama made another statement that the GOP is afraid of the Obamacare issue because the people love Obamacare. And again, this kind of a comment betrays that Obama is coming out of a position of his ego. It's all about love of things with his name in it. And there's absolutely no rational analysis of whether this is working or not. And it clearly is not working. And this is very, very harmful to our nation and its economy. Somebody actually sent me a cartoon that was really cute. It was two girls sitting on a bench on a city street talking to each other, and the first one says, I love Obamacare because it guarantees I have health coverage even though I'm out of work. And the second girl says, why are you out of work? And the first one says, well, because my employer had to fire me because he couldn't afford Obamacare. And that really does cut right to the heart of it. There's no such thing as a free lunch. The government cannot give you anything until it has already taken it away from you. And this is a classic case of a pure government giveaway to the health insurance companies. Now, I think health insurance is something we should all have, especially in our highly toxified and dangerous consumer marketplace. But I remember back when auto insurance was an option. And yes, there were uninsured motorists, and it was a problem. But back then, auto insurance companies had to make their products attractive to the consumer to persuade them to buy auto insurance by keeping the premiums low and by offering, decent benefits, service, decent claims payments, not a lot of hassle and fuss. And then car insurance was made mandatory. What did we see happen? The premiums went right through the roof. There was no more competition because the attitude of the auto insurance industry is they got to buy it from somebody. And so when all these auto insurance executives were out there golfing around the golf course, they were saying, let's set our premiums about, 20% higher. Just rake the dough in. And because they have to go to some place, we don't have to worry about decent service and decent claims payment. I remember there was this very funny TV show many, many years ago, The Addams Family, the original TV series version, and there was one episode dealing with Gomez Addams' life insurance policy. And the insurance boss was telling his underling, there's only two phases to the insurance industry, taking the money in and refusing to pay it out. And that's absolutely, in a nutshell, what the insurance business is all about. Now, somebody sent me this thing the other day. We need Obamacare because there are 48 million Americans who do not have health insurance coverage right now. And I pointed out, do you realize it's the same 48 million who are on food stamps? The solution isn't to loot everybody else to provide health insurance to those poor people. The solution is to bring back the jobs and the manufacturing so those 48 million can get off food stamps and buy health insurance. That's the real solution. Now, as I mentioned earlier in the show, it is already coming out from the people who are in charge of implementing this massive software system, which probably already has links into the NSA database. It's tracking your private medical records and evaluating what benefits you're entitled to under Obamacare. You voted Republican last election. I'm sorry, you don't get that appendectomy. And it isn't working. And despite comments by Health and Human Services Secretary Kathleen Sebelius that it's going to be ready next Tuesday, the people who are actually implementing that software are saying, no, it is not ready. It is full of problems. It will make mistakes. And those kind of mistakes can kill people. And we're already dealing with a death by medical mistake rate of 400,000 Americans every single year. We're also getting word from the Internal Revenue Service watchdog that already some $67 million has vanished from the Obamacare slush fund. And they have no idea where it went. This system isn't even started, and already millions are wandering off into the dark, dusty corners of our society. Now, getting on to the more general economy, and as a possible precursor to some very disappointing third-quarter earning reports, pending home sales fell 1.6% in August. And I know 1.6% doesn't sound like that much, but home sales generally are judged to be good or not based on just a few percentage points, and this is a significant drop. And part of the problem is, of course, the bankers and the realtors are always trying to drive those housing prices up, and the economy just isn't prepared to support those right now. And so home sales are slowing. I think it was J.P. Morgan just laid off another round of employees from their mortgage division. Most of the home sales that are being pointed to as proof the housing sector is recovering are these cash purchases of properties to convert to rental properties. There have even been allegations some of these cash purchases for houses are being used to launder criminally obtained money. Cash for the house, wait a week, dump the house on the market, get back money that's all laundered and free and clear to spend someplace. Meanwhile, over at the Bank of America, and this is a story coming out of Reuters, they're now openly acknowledging that massive fraud was taking place at the Bank of America during this whole run-up of the mortgage-backed securities leading to the crash of 2008. And Pierre Armand, who's a lawyer for the U.S. Attorney's Office in Manhattan, said that Bank of America, said Countrywide, made $165 million selling loans it promised were investment quality to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. And what the documents and witnesses are showing is this was a complete outright fabrication. In fact, Pierre Armand said it was a joke. They concocted these mortgage-backed securities. They had their pet rating agencies declare them AAA, and they sold them off to anybody, including pension funds. That's why so many pension funds are struggling right now. They took a major, major hit. Wall Street just went out and just looted the nation with these things, and that's how they operate here. And they're allowed to do it with impunity. They're allowed to do it with impunity. The CFTC has now concluded a 5-year investigation into whether silver was being manipulated, and not to anybody's surprise said, no, there's nothing wrong. We don't see any evidence of manipulation of silver. Just like the SEC turned a blind eye to Bernie Madoff's Ponzi scheme for 12 years. The government is not on the side of the people. It's on the side of the bankers and the financial wizards here. Now, there's an article we linked to whatreallyhappened.com. This came out of Rolling Stone magazine, which does a lot of really good work. And they're talking about looting the pension funds. And they just cite example after example of how the money junkies get hold of a city or county or state government and coerce laws that basically defund the pension funds, cut pension benefits in order to turn the money over to the bankers to service the city's growing debt. George Carlin was right. They want it all. They're coming for your retirement money. Bill Clinton looted Social Security. Mortgage-backed security fraud defunded most of the pensions across the country. And now the bankers have bought the state and local governments to simply erase what's left there and just give them the money. And remember, those pension funds technically are not the property of the various governments, just like the money in Social Security is not the property of the federal government. It's your money that you entrusted those governments and pension managers with. And they do not have a legal, let alone a moral right, to simply say, well, thank you for the money, we're not going to give it back because we got to go make good on a bunch of loans that we took out without your permission. Now, there's a very telling article that really points to the heart of the problem. This is over at Salon.com. Why no one's investigating Wall Street. And it points out this amazing disparity. Every time we complain to the federal government about the abuses of the bankers, the runaway fraud, LIBOR rigging, gold rigging, all of this stuff, what we get back from the federal government is, oh, it's a matter of resources. We really don't have the money to go after those Wall Street firms. And yet they seem to have a lot of money, plenty of money to spy on every American through the NSA, plenty of money to send the police and the National Guard with tear gas out to harass the Occupy protesters. They got plenty of money to be investigating food stamp fraud. And you want to talk about very little return? They're going to what? Go out and investigate somebody for food stamp fraud. They'll get back, what, a few $100s? How much could they get back by starting to arrest and prosecute some of these Wall Street firms? They'd get back billions. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and we're going to go to the phones. John in California. Aloha, John. Welcome to the show. What is on your mind?
Well, thanks a lot, Mike, for taking my call so quickly. Appreciate that. I just wanted to say, regarding your very recent, couple of minutes ago, comments regarding the Social Security payments that we've all made, I used to think exactly the same way you're talking up until maybe a year and a half or 2 years ago. And then I read the Social Security Act of 1935 for the very first time. And I'm 66 years old, by the way. Mm-hmm. And my parents never read it, and they never told me anything about it. My grandparents never read it, never told me anything about it. My aunts and uncles never did, and they had nothing to tell me about it when I grew up. None of my teachers ever told me about it. And then I read also 2 Supreme Court cases. One was in 1937. The other was as recently as 1960. One of them was called Helvering versus Davis, and for the life of me, I can't remember the other one. doesn't matter too much. But pretty much legally, all the money that I donated in was just that, a donation. And the Social Security Administration has the duty to do one of several things. These are my words. They can either pay me something or a fraction of something or nothing and still be within the law.
Well, that is certainly not the way it was presented to the American people when that additional withholding was attached to our paycheck. And I know this because many, many, many years ago, shortly after I had my run-in with the CIA at CBS Television City, I was basically it was made clear to me that I really didn't have a future there, having pissed off the CIA, and I wound up going to work as a technical director at this really hole-in-the-wall TV station down in Orange, California. And it was actually a Christian TV station, and one of these days I'm going to write a book about all the crazy stuff that went on there. But we had, in order to fill up our minimum broadcast day, we had these films we kept showing over and over again that we got from the U.S. government, one of which was a film on how Social Security was supposed to work. And because I got to watch it, a couple of hundred times during the course of my employment there, certainly the impression that was being put out in this official film was that it was our money that the government was entrusted with in order to invest and generate a return to take care of our retirement. Now, if the law says something else, it's another classic case of the government defrauding us and lying to us.
Correct. And this is so what I've been doing here, Mike, and I'm still in the process of doing it. I'm trying to get, for this reason and for other reasons, I'm trying to get from the Social Security Administration a photocopy of the exact form that I signed when I first signed up for Social Security back in 1965 or 63. I don't remember when it was exactly. So, and that's going to be my first step. If nothing else, people talk about constructive fraud. I think this is just outright fraud.
It is outright fraud.
However we want to put it, So
I mean, look at all the frauds this government has perpetrated against the people.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
From Spanish mines in Havana Harbor up to and including human-caused global warming. That's how this government operates, through lies, fraud, and deception.
Don't leave out the enforcement of income tax against the average person who does not work for the federal government, who does not hold a public office. None of us should be being hounded by the IRS to pay income taxes.
Well, you're absolutely right there. You're absolutely right about that. Okay?
Well, anyway, Mike, that's about all I had to say. And thanks for taking my call so quickly.
All right, you got it. All righty, let's see. Thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here. And now, another story coming out of the Examiner. Politicians understand they need more money. They need to come up with more money to give to the money junkies, to keep the bottom of their ledgers black, to service the debt that was run up long before we were all born, long before we had a chance to vote on any of this stuff. And by design, the Federal Reserve System always creates more debt than money with which to pay that debt, and that's why everybody is struggling. And politicians, knowing that next year is an election year, they've cooled the talk about additional taxes. Obama's already backing off his carbon tax to protect the re-election chances of Democrats next year. But they're still going out and pillaging the population with massive increases of traffic penalties and the imposition of quotas on the traffic officers. And apparently, or according to the CIR, they did a survey of state records showing all over the country that traffic fines have just exploded. In California, they're up to like $500 per infraction. And New York State is a close second to California. We're in the stage of our nation's history where the government is using any excuse to pillage the population. All right, we're going to take another phone call. Chris in Las Vegas. Aloha, Chris. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, Michael, I've done quite a bit of research and actually read the Social Security Act in toto, and I can tell you that the language in there testifies that it was originally contemplated and passed as a trust in Tontine, Tontine specifically.
See, that was my understanding.
And a trust in Tontine is a last man standing trust for the last beneficiary who is left gets everything, if anything, is left. Of course, there will be nothing left for any beneficiary to claim.
Mm-hmm. But the key word there is it was set up as a trust fund. And that is what isolates that money from the U.S. government. Because a trust fund, if I set up a trust fund, for example, to send my child to college, if I was fortunate enough to have a child or money, if I set up that trust fund, from that point on, I can't go in there and tinker with that money. It's held in trust for the benefit of the beneficiary. And that was originally the way Social Security was supposed to be set up. Of course, we all know that it started before then, but it really accelerated in the Clinton administration, where they were simply, quote-unquote, borrowing the money from the cash set aside for the baby boomer retirements to balance the federal budget. This during a time when the economy was supposed to be doing really, really great. And now the Social Security Trust Fund is filled with Treasury bonds that the U.S. government cannot redeem. There aren't enough tax-paying Americans to redeem all those Treasury bonds that are out there. There's a Treasury bond bubble. And that's why you're seeing more and more foreign countries aren't buying the Treasuries anymore. The Federal Reserve is buying them up with instantly created money. They may be well on their way to simply saying, hey, we own the country now. Forget about that civil government. You all work for the bankers from now on. And it's all created with ink and paper. And it only works if you believe this is the way society is supposed to operate. Rule by the bankers. No more legitimate a form of governance than rule by divine right or rule by slavery. And you have to stop believing. We all have to be Federal Reserve heretics.
Correct you are, Michael, but when you look at the word believe, it has a lie right in the middle of it.
Absolutely.
And the whole thing is a lie. Absolutely.
Absolutely. All right.
Thank you so much.
We're going to let you go and switch over quickly to George in Texas. Aloha. George, welcome back to the show. What's on your mind?
How you doing, Mike? I sat there and I looked at the health insurance quotes in my area. And you know what? I just finally called up Congressman Randy Weber's office, Senator Ted Cruz, and John Cornyn, and I just told them I will not be complying with Obamacare because I do not believe I should take food out of my kids' mouth, deprive them of clothes and what they need to supply to the federal government or the money junkies. And I just told her, I said, I am not going to comply with it. I said, I'm defunding. I said, you guys can't defund Obamacare. I'm going to defund it by not complying with it.
Well, I mean, and that's really what it all comes down to. Washington, D.C. and Wall Street are in a state of denial about just how bad things are out here in America. They are still operating clearly and thinking and making their decisions on the theory that there is still vast pools of untapped cash out here in the hinterland, and all they have to do is pass a new law or come up with a new plan or force us to buy something else that we don't have, and the money will continue to flow in there to prop up that pyramid scheme a little bit more. And it isn't out here. There is not enough money out here to pay for all of Obamacare or all of the banker loans. It just isn't here. And nobody in our government is even thinking about trying to rebuild this economy and its manufacturing to a point where we, the people, would even have a chance of paying off all this debt load. And that is the biggest single failure of the central government. We've got to take a break for Phyllis Schlafly and for commercials. Thank you for the call, George. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. The latest word we're getting from Capitol Hill is that the Senate is moving forward to vote on their version of the emergency spending bill, which has removed the House provision to defund Obamacare. So this is setting up a gridlock between the House and the Senate. They're going to be fighting back and forth over that one provision. I think ultimately the House will cave and raise the debt ceiling because they want to go on enjoying their staffs and perks and all the rest of that. There was actually talk that if the House and Senate are unable to reconcile the emergency spending bill, that Obama will raise the debt ceiling by executive order, which he is not allowed to do. All revenue measures must originate in the House. That's in the Constitution. The president can't just raise the debt ceiling. And again, the question everyone in America should be asking, and I'm going to ask that you ask it of all your friends and neighbors, why is the U.S. government borrowing instantly created money from a privately owned central bank at interest when Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution grants to the government the ability to issue their own public currency as a public utility free from interest to private bankers? Why? That's a question every American should be asking right now while Congress debates just how much further into debt slavery they're going to plunge we the people. We're going to go to the phones here. Alex in Texas, aloha. Alex, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
He dropped.
He dropped. Oh, well, to heck with him. All right. Apparently the FBI has released a video of the Navy Yard shooter prowling the halls with his shotgun. Amazing. I don't see any AR-15 there, which was the corporate media was telling us on day one. He's got an assault rifle. He's got one of those evil assault rifles. Not in that video. And they're making a big deal about the messages he had scrawled all over the gun that he'd bought and talking about how he thought he was being controlled by radio waves and so forth and so on. Not a mention that he was on prescription antidepressant, specifically trazodone, which has a long history, well documented, of provoking violent rages and craziness. They're still out there trying to protect the pharmaceutical industry. It's not the pills, it's the guns. The guns are bad, blah, 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 blah. Now, I want to talk about this attack at the shopping mall down in Nairobi because I'm more than ever convinced this is a prequel to a really large false flag attack here in the United States of America. And first of all, I want to call your attention to some obvious signs of fraud and fakery that are out there, because there was this article about all Muslims leave, blah, 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 and I linked it to the front page of what really happened. And the original article is illustrated with a bunch of photos, which I made local copies of to guard against their being Orwellized as things get pointed out. And there are some problems with some of these pictures. And I'm not going to go into the details of all of them, except to point out there's this one photo that shows a man in a white jacket walking away from the mall in company with a Nairobi officer of some kind. And the back of the jacket is soaked in red, and there are some very obvious holes in it. And this picture screams fake to me. Because if you look very carefully at the picture, you'll see that the red coloration is concentrated in the center, and there's some kind of dampness spreading out even further. Now, real blood does not separate into red portion and clear portion as it wicks its way through fabric. Real blood doesn't operate like that. So this looks to me like fake blood. And I've used enough fake blood in my film work to recognize it when I see it. More importantly, those holes in the back of his jacket, if those are bullet holes, given their location, this guy should be on the ground, let alone, as they show him in this picture, walking away under his own power without assistance. And so this thing reeks of just setup and propaganda fake to get us all thinking about those evil, gosh darn, al-Shabaab Muslim terrorists. And right on cue, the president of Somalia is out there saying, oh yes, al-Shabaab could attack the United States. Be scared, al-Shabaab's coming to get you. Gonna hide under your bed and hide in your bedroom closet there waiting to get you. And the only one who can save you from al-Shabaab is the United States government and the NSA, which obviously did not detect and prevent the attack on the mall, which we now know was a long, well-planned process, including the renting of spaces in the mall and the smuggling in of the weapons disguised as store inventory. So they're out there just fanning this thing as hard as they can. And apparently the U.S. State Department has issued a warning against global terror directed against Americans. They're fanning this thing up. They're practically flashing a big neon sign. False flag, false flag, false flag, coming to a city near you. And crashing planes into buildings isn't going to impress anybody anymore because we've already been through that, and we know that was a fall. That was a fraud. That was a hoax. We know that Boston was a hoax. We've now proven that Nairobi is a hoax. It was a staged attack to rebuild the terror meme in the eyes of the American people. By the way, apparently we're now seeing this call not only in Nairobi but across America for TSA to be at shopping malls to search your bags and purses and whatever as you go into the shopping mall to prevent another terror attack. Well, when you realize that what happened in Kenya involved a rented storefront and weapons coming in disguised as inventory, searching bags would not have worked and will not work. It's just another way of throwing money at the security industrial complex. We're going to grab a phone call here real quick. Nociem in the Netherlands. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yes, hello, Mike. Yes, I want to comment about Kenya. I see it as am I hello?
Yes, you're on the air.
Okay. I see Kenya, when you look at the whole progress, at the agenda, Kenya is like a train. You know, a train is going to hit a wall, but the train has been stopped by the Russians, by President Putin and Lavrov. They said, okay, Syria, don't touch that, okay? So I see that as a agenda. The Kenyan incident is an agenda that has been written down, and now Russia has said, okay, now stop this, and we can we can do this in a diplomatic way.
Well,
you know,
what you're saying basically is that Syria is on pause and the U.S. war agenda is shifting back to Africa, and that makes absolutely perfect sense because we understand Africa is the world's largest remaining undeveloped store of natural resources, and we know the U.S. has been salivating over Africa ever since they set up the Africa Corps, or AFRICOM, or whatever they're calling it this time out. And it's the reason they invaded Mali, because France and the United States are desperate for gold to replace the bullion from Germany that they leased out the back door. And that's really what this stuff is all about. But I wouldn't rule out war in Syria anyway. They're just trying to figure out a way to finagle it. Certainly the attack in Nairobi opens the door to U.S. intervention in Kenya, which just discovered a whole new bunch of oil fields, I might add. But I think right now the major purpose is that we're being pre-sold terror ahead of a new false flag attack in the U.S. And
okay, but that is stalled. You know what stalled is?
Yeah, I know what stalled is, but I don't think the new terror. Okay. I don't think a new false flag is stalled. I think it's been put into overdrive.
No, they are now figuring out how to do it, because the people are aware of it, because all the media attention. When you look at RT, Russia Today, or you look at Press TV. You see, people are aware.
These people are desperate. We have to take a commercial break. We have to take a commercial break. I'll respond to your comment after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And Nociem is absolutely right. The powers that think they are have finally awakened to the realization that they can no longer tell a lie and invade this country, wait a couple of months for things to cool down, tell another lie, invade that country, wait a couple of months for things to cool down. The backlash against Syria has made it clear the days of lying Americans into war after war after war with impunity are now gone. And so I think they're going to try and just kick the whole thing off all at once. And they're going to use a false flag to do it. They're telegraphing the coming false flag with this hoaxed up thing about them all in Kenya. And it's going to have to be something really big and really scary and really spectacular, because crashing more jets into more buildings, that's kind of passé. Been there, done that, didn't buy the T-shirt. So what are the options? Well, we know from Lindsey Graham they're considering setting off a nuclear weapon someplace in the United States of America and saying, oh, see, Iran did have nuclear weapons, and they gave it to Syria, and they gave it to these people, and we've got to make war on all of them, and just launch the attacks at that point. An alternative theory is releasing gas attacks across several cities across America, so the threat feels immediate, because if they set off a nuclear bomb in Charleston Harbor, everybody west of the Mississippi is going to go, oh, that's terrible, but hey, that's far away from me. They need to generate a sense of immediate threat. And of course, the third possibility, and may explain why all of a sudden so many of these large banks are having mysterious computer glitches, is a virtual 911, in which, in order to cover up the tracks of all this looting of the American people by the private central bank in Wall Street, the U.S. government will deliberately crash all the computers of the financial system and say, gosh darn it, we were just on the verge of turning the economy around. And instead of being a financial crash caused by greed and corruption and stupidity, now it's an act of war from those dastardly Iranian, Russian, Chinese hackers. Because they've run out of other options to get this thing going. And the only way we are going to deter them from trying a new false flag is if everybody's talking about it and everybody's letting them know that when the big bang happens, we're not going to buy the official story. We figure it is the inevitable next step by a government desperate to get their wars back on track here. All right, we got a whole bunch of phone calls there. Alex in Texas, welcome back. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Aloha. I was calling because I'd like to know, since you worked in media and you worked in Hollywood and all that,
yeah.
Did you have a chance to catch last night's episode of South Park? Because it was all concentrated on the NSA and it was a satire on how they listen to everything
I didn't, but I will definitely make a point of going back and catching the replay.
Yeah, you should definitely do that, and I'd love to know what your opinion is on the show. Maybe sometime during the week if you could let it out. I'd really appreciate it.
I'll make a point of hunting that down and watching it. I do like South Park, but sometimes on my schedule I don't get to watch as much TV as I'd like to.
No, I totally understand, totally comprehend. All right, Mike, well, that's all I wanted to see, and hopefully I'll catch your opinion later on in the week.
All right, thank you very much.
Have a great day.
All right, we're going to switch over to Shane in North Carolina. Aloha, Shane. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
And I'll start by saying I definitely concur. Even Janet Napolitano said it's like some kind of certainty. I'm sure you probably heard that quote. She says cyber attack, it's a definite thing, like before she stepped down from her position.
Yes, I remember.
She was on record saying that it's an absolute 100% certainty, so that definitely, supports what you just said. Now, hopefully you haven't already mentioned this, but right when I tuned in, you were talking about some photographs that are very suspicious concerning that Kenya Mall shooting.
Yes.
I posted something on your Facebook wall the other day, and I found out about it from this YouTube video by a guy named Max Malone. Got to give him credit for finding it first. But anyways, there's this one photograph of 3 people. It's a lady and like 2 children, and they're on the ground and they're supposedly hiding from the shooter. But the interesting thing is, and the caption even says, these 3 ladies duck for cover behind a counter, hiding from the shooter. Okay, but obviously the photographer taking the picture would have totally given them away to the shooters.
He was also a target. I mean, there's a couple of other pictures that are like that, where the photographer, if you think about the geometry of the situation, the photographer is between the soldiers he's photographing and the supposed threat. The photographer isn't moving, and the soldiers aren't telling him to get out of the way, and that's why it feels like it's a staged shot to me.
It's completely outrageous, but yeah, hopefully you get a chance to see that particular photo I'm talking about. A friend of mine jokingly said, "Oh, it's okay, I've got a press pass." Like that's going to stop being shot. But I mean, seriously, there's these 3, a lady and 2 kids hiding behind a counter, and it says they're hiding from the shooter, where this cameraman would have totally given them away, made him vulnerable to shooters, and made them vulnerable to being shot.
Yes.
So, yeah, so it's definitely smelling like another sham for sure.
And for me, that shot of the guy in the white jacket with the red stain on the back, which is clearly not blood because of the way it's separating as it travels through the fabric, and these what look like bullet holes on his back, and yet he's walking unassisted. He should be dead. One of those bullet holes is virtually on top of his spine and definitely through, where his heart would be. So it just screams of fake here. Thanks an awful lot. We're going to switch over to Paul in Canada. Aloha, Paul. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Listen, Mike, I got to concur with Shane and you both on the false flag narrative there. Things are definitely going sideways in a really quick way, but I think a lot of the RBN listeners realize what's going on, and at least it seems that way. Even the lad out in the Netherlands seem to have a grasp on things, so that gives me faith. But I got to tell you guys, you're absolutely right. I see it too. You know, you and I had sneaking suspicions about all the visits by all the high-profile, with all due respect, all the high-profile politicians going to Israel in August.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden we have all these flare-ups in Syria and this whole narrative that's, you know, been carrying on for the last month over there, and the American people fighting back against it and responding that, you know, they're not buying it. And, you know, I see something happening on our shores here in North America. And they're going to try and throw it off because they are desperate.
That's right.
The bankers they're out of control. They're desperate. They'll do anything.
Mm-hmm.
You have things coming out about, you know, people within D.C. that are directly connected to Al-Shabaab, and, you know,
yeah, and we know one of them is already fake, because they listed all these guys had come from America to carry out this terror attack in Nairobi, and they gave one name of a guy in Kansas City, and reporters were trying to track down this guy in Kansas City, and the Somali community says, we've never heard of the guy. Nobody can confirm he was ever actually in Kansas City. So we already know they're faking this stuff. And again, for me, the smoking gun is that photo with the guy with the white jacket and the red stain on the back and what appear to be bullet holes. Because that's a dead giveaway what's going on.
It is, and I saw another video, too, last night of a guy who was directing people into an underground parking lot, and that looked totally staged, too. It was hundreds of people. And, you know, clapping his hands, you know, like, way to go, folks, you know, as they were all heading towards the camera into the underground parking lot.
Yeah.
Anyway,
no, this whole thing is suspicious. And I'm not saying there wasn't shooting and there weren't really dead people, but it's definitely being hyped and promoted and amplified through fraud and fakery.
Right.
Got to take a break for commercials. Thanks an awful lot, Paul. And boy, the phone lines are loaded. We'll get to phone calls when we come back. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show. And a listener just sent in a photo of a statement from one of the government benefit programs that are out there, and I'm not sure which one it is, but it's basically a notification that the monthly benefit is going down from $155 a month to $35 a month. So they're taking more and giving back less, as long as you let them get away with it. We're going to go back to the phones here. Eric in Nebraska. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Eric, are you there? All right. I guess not. We're going to switch over.
Yeah, he's there.
Oh, he's there. Eric? Yeah, now there you are.
Okay.
You're on the air.
You sound really focused today, and I hate to sidetrack you, but I want to talk about the Pope. I've been thumbing through a book by usury, and seems like every pope since, I guess, Paul VI has pretty much been a heretic because they haven't reversed the church's stance on usury. I'm not sure if the pope's outlandish behavior right now is kind of to distract.
Well, remember, the Vatican's got its own bank that's been, implicated time and again with money laundering and other crimes. And we found out during the run-up to Pope Benny's resignation that they actually have a second financial structure that's considerably larger than the Institute for Religious Works and represents the real wealth of the church. And as the lawyers started to home in on that one, that's when Pope Benny stepped down to try and hold off the firestorm of lawsuits over all this child molestation that's going on.
Okay. I guess you consider mortal sin, I guess. Should we have the church maybe detract from outlandish interest rates?
Well, the new pope, when he came in, made a couple of statements that I actually thought represented a significant change in the church direction, but then he since backed off of them. One of them was that he thought money should be the servant of the people and not its master, which obviously I agree with, and that's the difference between government-issued currency and currency borrowed at interest from a bank. When the government is issuing the currency, the public currency is a public utility and it serves the people. When you have the system that we have now, where all money in circulation begins as a loan at interest from that bank, that is money as the master of people. And we can clearly see how the accumulating money power of the banks is literally reshaping our civilization around us, corrupting our government structure, corrupting our value system. So on that, I absolutely agree. But then again, because the Vatican itself has a huge financial operation involving banking, the Pope kind of backed off on that one.
Hey, do you know the history of the Leviticus 25:10? I guess excerpt from that is on the Liberty Bell. It's not the full quote, the 50 years Jubilee, but definitely somebody put it there for a reason. I don't know if you know anything about that.
No, I hadn't looked at it, but it's certainly worth going and investigating about that. But yeah, a lot of people don't understand that originally Christians forbade usury just the way the Muslims do, and lending was done as a loan plus a flat fee. So there wasn't a motive for the bankers to try and delay commerce and repayment in order to maximize their return. We saw that during the 1980s, where the U.S. government was using the banking system as an instrument of foreign policy in South America, where they would talk these South American governments into borrowing money from the American banks, and then the CIA would go in and do crop sabotage and industrial sabotage in order to delay or thwart that government's ability to repay the banks, and from then on, once they're that deep in debt, they would pretty much do what the U.S. government and the bankers told them to do. Eric dropped. Okay, let's go on to Kyle in Pennsylvania. Aloha, Kyle. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Kyle's gone too.
Kyle's gone too. I must have just talked all these people to death. I got to move faster. Glenn in Philadelphia. Aloha.
Aloha, Mike. In terms of potential upcoming problems or false flags, there's sort of a scheduled event that's coming up, which would be the Hajj in mid-October, in which the huge influx of people will converge upon Mecca to circumambulate the Kaaba during the Hajj, and MERS is undoubtedly going to spread through that crowd to some degree, and then those people will return to their respective homes and share the joy of MERS around the world.
That's an interesting scenario. That is a very interesting scenario. They'd definitely want something that could be identified and traced to that kind of an incident. But again, I think most people would realize those Muslims who went to Mecca to pray were not an intentional part of a biological plot. And so, again...
Oh, yes, that's what I mean. It's plausibly deniable and in slow motion. Absolutely.
It's plausibly deniable for the Muslim worshippers. And because of that, they can't say, oh, it's a Muslim plot, because they're selling the idea that these Muslims willingly allowed themselves to be infected with a serious illness in order to get at Americans, and that makes about as much sense as Assad gassing his own Alawite supporters.
No, certainly inadvertent on their part, but the question is, whence came the thing in the first place? You know.
Well, it is an interesting scenario. I think it lacks the drama of a nuclear bomb or a computer crash or something like that. But it is definitely an interesting it's an interesting possibility.
Yeah, it can certainly muddy the waters. About the usury thing you were just talking about. Jewish society, of course, had the Shemitah. The Romans had the Jubilee. Periodically, they would all hit the reset button on the economy. Debts were canceled. Indentured servants were released, and all lien property returned to its original owners.
Yeah, we need that here. I think it's going to happen anyway, because when that whole financial system comes crashing down, I know there are going to be all these carpetbaggers standing up and saying, we are morally obligated to pay the debts of the previous government. No, we're not. It's all odious debt, because it was money borrowed without our permission to give to Israel, to give to Wall Street, to give to the war machine. There's a recognized principle in international law called odious debt, where we, the people of the United States of America, are not responsible for government borrowing money that is not spent to take care of this nation, its people, its education, its health, and its infrastructure.
Right. It takes benevolent leaders who care about truth to push that through. Let's hope we can find some.
Well, the best way to have benevolent leaders is to distribute power across the land, so the advantages of power just really aren't all that attractive to sociopaths and money junkies. That was the reason the United States was set up, with the power reserved to the states and the people, and the central federal government was just supposed to arbitrate between the states, and that was all they were supposed to do. Of course, after the Civil War, the U.S. federal government just grabbed a huge block of power to itself, and things have been going downhill ever since, really accelerating after we got that Federal Reserve. Thank you for the call, Glenn. I'm going to let you go and try and squeeze in one more call before the commercial break. Chuck in Texas. Aloha, Chuck. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, I've got a question for you, Mike. I'm writing a newspaper article, and
I'm having a hell of a time finding where I believe it's a crime in Israel to pass out Bibles. Is it not?
I really do not know. I know that Christians are openly persecuted in Israel. I recall hearing something about that, but I don't have a source site, in my memory to hand to you. But I would imagine a web search is going to turn it up sooner or later.
This is what's amazing. You put any kind of search you want, searching for that question on Google, and it acts like it always misunderstands. There's no way to put that question in and get an answer.
Try one of the non-standard search engines like StartPage.com.
I think they use Google primarily themselves. I wonder if they pull off of anybody else's searches. But it's just driving me crazy. I've been doing this for 30 minutes, and I cannot find an answer to that question.
All right, I'll tell you what. During this upcoming commercial break, I'll see if I can find it, and if I can, I'll post it to the front page of whatreallyhappened.com. Fair enough?
Thank you very much.
All right, switching over to Dan in Washington. Aloha, Dan. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. I just kind of wanted to comment on, I just read a day or two ago recently about the sentencing of Donald Sacktoben. It was supposedly the former FBI agent that was connected to Stephen Ivins that mysteriously went and disappeared and just shot himself for no reason after he apparently started spouting off to a Russian ambassador about how everybody in the FBI is crazy, something's going on, and just recounting. So after his disappearance and mysterious death, then we get the Aurora, Colorado shooting, Sandy Hook, Boston bombing, now this Naval Yard shooting. It seems apparent to me that this man was on to something, and all of a sudden he was suicided.
That seems to happen a lot these days.
After years of investigating Oklahoma City bombing, the first Twin Towers bombings, 9/11, all of a sudden this guy, so now apparently he pled guilty to providing a leak to the Associated Press about agent in Al-Qaeda's inner circle, exposing his role. So I wonder if this is the same Al-Qaeda we're supplying weapons of war to now in Syria.
Yeah, it would be.
4 years in prison.
It would be.
A leak.
And now that they're coming to power in Syria, they're abusing Christians even more. I mean, as a foreign policy, it's just total screwed up. We got to take a break for commercials. I got to find a story. We'll be back after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And in response to that caller who was asking about whether it's legal to hand out Bibles in Israel, what I am finding is there is a general law against proselytizing anybody under the age of 15. There have been numerous incidents where the police have escorted Christians away from handing out Bibles out of concern that the more extreme Jewish population might physically harm them. I'm also noticing apparently a lot of nations have laws against handing out Bibles on the street, including, I'm seeing a story from down here in Florida, where some of the Gideon's people were arrested for handing out Bibles on the sidewalk. And even though I myself am not a religious person, I have to come down on the side of these people, handing out Bibles on the sidewalk, because that's a First Amendment protected freedom of expression. Now, I'm in agreement with not having children under the age of 15 being proselytized, because who knows what they're being sold. But I have to come down on the side, even though I'm not religious myself. If you're on a public space and you want to hand out a Bible and somebody wants to take it, that's got to be covered by the First Amendment here. All right, we're going to grab, apparently Nosim in the Netherlands called back, and what is on your mind?
Yeah, hello, Mike.
Yes.
Well, about that religion and stuff, Okay, I leave that apart. But the interesting part is where we are now at the stage is America, the American military-industrial complex, has about 900 bases covering China, Russia, all the peninsula regions, and also under there. And what we see now is, what is now happening is they will come to a compromise. They will talk to each other. You see that in the media. Very slowly, it's coming very slowly. to see that it's again a Roman Empire. America is a Roman Empire that is going to collapse very slowly in its own footprint because they want too much. And if you want too much, if you are too greedy, the rule is, if you are too greedy, then greed will eat you.
Yes, it's money addiction here, but you're absolutely right. And you need to go back. Remember what that other caller was saying about how Rome had their Jubilee. Every 50 years, all the debts were zeroed out to reset the system. When Rome stopped having that, when the money junkie said, no, we can't have a Jubilee, I'm owed all this money, you'll hurt me, that's when Rome began to collapse. It didn't collapse from outside conquest, it collapsed from within, from too much debt, and that is exactly what is happening to the United States of America right now.
Exactly, yes.
Okay?
That's what I want to tell to you and to the audience, that they are aware that history will repeat itself.
Which is what's wrong with history.
And if you don't learn history, you're going to make the same mistake again and again.
Well, again, you need to go back to the fundamental property of this private central banking model, in that by design it creates more debt than money with which to pay that debt. And the debt accumulates over time until the economy cannot support that debt any longer, and it comes crashing down. And thankfully, because of globalism, all of these private central banks may get dragged down at the same time. And it will be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for the nations of the world to stand back up and reform themselves and reject this failed predatory banking model and just get rid of it and start launching into the future, you know, back with this idea of the public currency as a public utility.
That is very true what you say, Mike, because, Mike, what you just said is an inspiration and a thing that people need to think about. Because this is an opopportunity, one of a lifetime, you know.
It is, and we have to be prepared to seize
what
it.
I mean? Yeah.
We have to be prepared to seize it, because when this system comes crashing down, the money junkies will immediately come in and try and start the same scam all over again. And we have to be ready to grab anybody who's up there talking about a new private central bank. We have to tar and feather them, hang, draw, quarter them, burn them, and have the ashes peed on by a rabid dog.
Yeah.
Okay? Thank you very much. Thank you for the phone call. We're going to switch over to Bob in Florida. Aloha, Bob. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Bob,
Mike, from time to time I have these criminals come into my backyard, and I have to ask them tough questions. When Rudolph Giuliani came, I knew exactly what I would ask him, because his crimes against humanity are just endless. But I just came across an ad for Tom Donaldson, the former National Security Advisor under Barry Soetoro, coming to speak here. And I was thinking to myself that I could ask him about the drone policy, I could ask him about a number of different things, but I wanted to get your input. What would you ask Tom Donaldson if he was to come into your backyard, Mike?
Oh, I don't know if I'd even take the time to talk to him, because, you know, I'm going to get the official government answer for anything, and it almost seems like a rather pointless waste of time. But I think if I was going to be asking one question, if I had the opportunity to ask one question, I would ask him, do you actually think that Assad gassed his own Alawite supporters, women and children, in front of the UN chemical weapons inspectors? And if you do, what was his motive for doing so? Because there was no military objective satisfied by such an attack, and certainly it's not helping Assad's political realities to do it. What was his motive? Because that is what should be there and is missing in the official story.
All right, well, fair enough. Thanks for your input, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot. And the phone lines are empty. Again, 800-313-9443, coming up on the top of the show. Let's move on here to the situation in Syria, because we're now hearing from the Russian delegation that the UN Security Council is likely to vote through a Syria resolution possibly tomorrow and certainly early next week. Now, what they're doing to try and satisfy all parties is the UN resolution will mention the possibility of military action if Assad fails to surrender his chemical weapons, but it does not have the automatic trigger in it that the United States was demanding. And so Russia's going to go along with this because the United States gets to say, oh, military action's possible, it's possible, it's possible, but it's not built into the resolution. Now, the Russians, I think, are being dangerously naive because there's enough of a crack here politically for the U.S. to start shooting cruise missiles through, and if the U.S. is, in fact, planning a new major false flag to be blamed on Iran, Syria, the whole list of nations to be conquered, then all of this will be moot in the next couple of weeks anyway. But that's the latest word that we're getting from that. Russia has also provided evidence to the United Nations that the sarin that was supposedly used in that August 21st attack was very clearly homemade. It is not a military-grade, factory-produced compound, which again undermines the story that Assad had anything to do with this, because Assad has stockpiles of commercially produced military-grade sarin, and he doesn't need to mix up a batch of it in a garage somewhere. Meanwhile, phony Tony Blair is back out there from his retirement screaming about the necessity to invade Syria if it fails to comply with its commitment to eliminate the chemical weapons arsenal. And of course, we already know what the U.S. is going to say. And it doesn't matter what Syria turns over, the U.S. will say, we have intelligence that he's hiding more. They were already trying to float that mobile biological weapons laboratory story a couple of days ago. So the attack will be on. And my response to phony Tony Blair is, here's your rifle. Here's your parachute. We'll call Syria and tell them you are on your way to kick their butts all by yourself. But after that dodgy dossier that you foisted on a trusting public to get the war in Iraq going, you just go and do this by yourself, and we're going to sit this one out here. Meanwhile, 2 more Russian warships have joined their fleet in the eastern Mediterranean. So Russia is clearly not of a view that this UN resolution and this Russian-Syria chemical weapons deal is going to deter the United States from their long-lusted-for wars with Syria and Iran. And they're preparing for a worst-case scenario of a U.S. attack. We'll be back after Phyllis Schlafly and these commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome to our show, hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. Dan, the man, is now sitting in our control room, hand hovering over the telephone, waiting for it to ring so he can pounce down and put you on the air. Now, an interesting aspect of the situation in Kenya just surfaced courtesy of a very alert reader who sent this to me. 2 days before the attack on that shopping mall in Nairobi, the Kenyan government announced that they would host the first yuan clearinghouse in all of Africa. Now, people are able to use the yuan in Africa, but they have to go through exchanges to convert it first to the U.S. dollar, and then from the U.S. dollar into whatever their desired currency is. And this yuan clearinghouse that Kenya was going to set up would allow Africans to trade their currencies for yuans directly without going through the U.S. dollar. That's got to raise a I'm sure that the private central bankers and the NSA knew what Kenya was planning to do long before the announcement. And there is a possible motive for this vile, dastardly terror attack in Kenya. How dare they break free from the dollar? How dare they go to the yuan? So there's definitely a there, because we know that all of these attacks and wars and assassinations ultimately track back to the private central bankers trying to force the world to continue with their little scam. And again, the question I asked in hour number 1 and hour number 2, and I'm going to ask it again, and you should ask it of everybody you know. Why is the U.S. government borrowing money created out of thin air from a privately owned central bank at interest when Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution allows the U.S. government to create their own money and put it into circulation interest-free? That is the question every single American should be asking right now. And please put it on your social media, email it to all your friends. It really lays it right out there. Over in Sudan, they're having some scuffles over fuel prices because the government has cut fuel subsidies, and the resulting surge in fuel costs has triggered riots, and apparently somewhere around 30 people have now died in those riots, all of them civilians. Over in Greece, and this is an important piece of news, a group of people within the Greek army is now calling for a coup d'etat and an ouster of this banker government that was put in through obvious election fraud. Remember how it went with Greece? Greece was holding their elections, and an anti-banker, anti-bailout candidate party won, but they didn't have a clear majority, so they had to form a coalition with those politicians who are all about banker bailouts and, you know, driving the people further into debt. And that pro-banker coalition group refused to form a coalition government to force a second election, which was marked with vote fraud that was as obvious as taking ballot boxes from anti-banker precincts and just burning them in the town square. And of course, under that government, which stole power through massive vote fraud, Greece has gotten considerably worse for the people of Greece. And so now we're hearing calls within the army for a coup d'etat to eject that government. Apparently the Greek Supreme Court is holding emergency meetings trying to find some way out of this impasse. But if there is a coup d'etat in Greece, if there is a revolt, and the anti-banker party gets back into power and says, we've got to run Greece for the Greek people and not for the European Central Bank and the IMF and the World Bank, then all those credit default swaps Wall Street sold against Greece's debt start to come due. And there will be hands pounding on the doors of Wall Street saying, hey, you sold us these credit default swaps against Greece's debt. Greece has clearly defaulted. They've collapsed. Where's my money? And Wall Street does not have the cash to make good on those credit default swaps because derivatives are unregulated. And we know what Wall Street's going to do. They're going to turn around to the U.S. government and say, we need another bailout. Please, we meant well. We promise we'll be good. And they never are. And the U.S. government will turn around to you, the American people, and say, you've got to cough up more money because we've got to protect Wall Street because they made a bad decision selling credit default swaps against Greece's debt. And we, the American people, are going to say what we have been saying for months now, we don't have any more. We have nothing more to give you because we have a government and a financial sector so totally focused on taking money away from the people that nobody was thinking about how to rebuild the economy and our manufacturing so that we, the people, can transform our labor into real wealth to pay all those debts and all those bills. The short-sightedness of Wall Street and Washington, D.C. killed the goose that was laying all those golden eggs they're piling up around their neckties. Now, there's a very alarming story, and this came in from LouRockwell.com. It's called Making the Victim Pay for the Bullet. And it's talking about this dynamic entry by police into the home of this elderly couple. 71-year-old woman was involved in this. And it all began because apparently somebody threw a stink bomb at a house and wrote on the garage, please stop stalking me. And the police just arbitrarily decided without any evidence that this 71-year-old woman was somehow responsible for this. And it turned out, of course, she wasn't. And the police executed a SWAT raid into her home, jerked her arms back behind her so hard it tore both rotator cuffs on her shoulders. She's had to have several expensive surgeries. So she filed a claim with the police for damages caused by the fact that they raided the wrong house. The police department refused. She took it to court. And here is where it gets interesting. U.S. District Judge Beverly O'Connell upheld Laguna Beach's claim for immunity and said that, yes, kicking down the door of the 71-year-old woman and grabbing her arms behind her hard enough to damage both of her shoulders was proportionate use of force and was objectively reasonable when judged from the perspective of an officer on the scene who was concerned that this 71-year-old woman represented a threat to him because we were dealing with a crime of violence. And in point of fact, there was no violence. Throwing a stink bomb is not an act of violence. And she went on to talk about the what's called blanket immunity for the police force. And we've mentioned many times, when governments start to use the police force to repress and terrorize the population, the first thing you do is send out the message that no matter what the police do, they will never be prosecuted, they will never be punished, and this District Judge Beverly O'Connell just reasserted that idea. The police can kick down the door of a 71-year-old woman, cause grievous permanent harm to her person, and even though they had the wrong person and brutalized this woman, no, it's perfectly okay. This is the way the police is supposed to work in the United States of America. And I'll tell you what the end result of this is going to be. You're going to have some homeowner someplace in America who's going to look out the window and see a bunch of these Kevlar jacketed thugs heading for his front door, and he's going to say, you know something? They're coming in to brutalize me and brutalize my family, and I know the courts won't do anything to stop them. And this guy is going to open fire on the police right then and there, which I'm sure the government would love because they'd scream, oh, the evils of gun owners and the rest of it. We'll be right back after these commercials. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're talking about this epidemic of police brutality all across the country. SWAT team raids on very obviously unthreatening individuals like this 71-year-old woman. And the court's saying, oh yeah, that was the right and just thing to do. And people are starting to fight back in peaceful ways against police abuse. And there was this interesting story over at libertycrier.com about this gentleman named Rick, who founded Veterans Against Police Abuse. And he's basically set up his car with all these little tiny TV cameras all over it. You've seen them, the little plastic in case they're waterproof, and they have a memory card. And he has them basically keyed where he can switch them all on when the police pull them over, to let the police know they are being recorded. They're also mounting a petition campaign for all police officers to have video cameras on their person documenting what they do. Now, of course, we know from the point of view of the government, they want the ability to watch you and spy on you all the time, but you're not supposed to watch them doing what they do. And we are still getting reports of police officers who will confiscate, if not outright destroy, people's smartphones and cameras when they are taking pictures of the police, very clearly violating the constitutional rights of people, even though the courts have repeatedly ruled that you have a First Amendment right to take pictures in any public space of the police, who are public employees doing their job. Now, Ohio has joined the very long list of states now acquiring these armored fighting vehicles specifically designed for asymmetric warfare, which is the government's euphemism for putting down mass riots by the American people. We don't have enough money to feed our population. We don't have enough money to keep our schools operational. But by golly, they got lots of money for armored cars and bullets. The government is getting ready to declare war on the American people and on the 50 states. The only thing that will stop them is we the people staying calm and standing back and not giving them an excuse to declare a national emergency and just let this whole central banking scam fall apart and take the federal government with it. We're going to take a phone call here. Dan in Louisiana. Aloha, Dan. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Oh, not much. You know what? I just tuned in to you, Mike. I think you're really spot on. You're really over the target in all of your analysis and assessment. You know, all these overlapping police agencies, they use all this spying technology in combination with the prison underbelly, in combination with the money and also the propaganda from Hollywood it keeps this whole image going. So, you know, you just got to try to not buy into it. You got to try to put your mind and your money other places other than the giant corporatocracy.
I agree. I absolutely agree. And, of course, Karen Tostado would agree with you as well. You know, she's been running United We Strike now for, well, for quite some time. And we're in a disagreement right now because I was asking her if she wanted to get involved with a call for Americans to empty their bank accounts on the day the U.S. invades Syria or Iran, or for that matter, anybody. And at issue is a U.S. law regarding causing a bank run. And I went and I checked the law, and the law is specifically targeted at manipulation for the purpose of causing a run on the bank for personal profit. But boycotting a bank is considered a legitimate form of protest. And so I thought on those grounds that we could do that. Karen Tostado disagreed and said she was concerned that calling for a withdrawal of savings accounts and selling of stocks during the next invasion would violate that law. So we're kind of at an impasse on that. But, yeah, pulling your money out of the system, that's the strongest peaceful message we the people still have.
Yep. And you know, like you guys were just saying, there's going to be different false flags that are going to hit. It's going to be like a hurricane or a big storm, and then the bank accounts.
Well, it's not going to be a hurricane or a big storm because, contrary to popular myth, those sort of happen by themselves. But no, it'll be a nuclear bomb someplace in the United States blamed on Iran. It'll be targeted biological attacks on several cities, probably with anthrax because they don't want to use something that's actually going to trigger a runaway, out-of-control contagion, or it'll be the virtual 911 that even Janet Napolitano was telegraphing on her farewell speech.
Yeah.
Or a combination of all three, who knows?
Well, our system is a war system. You know, they want to keep this war going. You know, the war contractors keep getting paid. You know, that's really what it's all about. You know, that's why I like playing Call of Duty on the computer, so I can wage war without killing nobody, you know, because you got all these people killing people. But if you spend your time part of the day in a virtual world,
you know, if you score too high on Call of Duty, man, you're going to get a call from those military recruiters. Anyway, listen, I got to let you go here. Thank you very much for the phone call, and I want to hit one more story before the commercial break. This is a story at 12160 on how the TSA is now going to roll out covert surveillance vans, where now they're going to have these vans that appear nondescript, and they're going to park them in areas and just scan people and x-ray them as they walk by. And there's nothing new about that, because I remember when I was in New York for the 10th anniversary of 9/11, and we were having this big gathering that Lenny Charles put together, and a lot of the What Really Happened fans came out, and we had a really good time. But I noticed during the 2 days that we were doing this, there was a UPS truck parked at the end of the block that never, ever moved. Now, UPS vans tend to drive around a lot because they're supposed to be picking up and delivering packages. But I actually took pictures of this UPS van parked there just hour after hour after hour after hour for 2 whole days. And so I figured that was not really UPS. That was somebody keeping watch on what we were saying here at this little 10th anniversary get-together. And so it's not a new idea, not at all. All righty, let's see. Getting over to the NSA, which would be on the very top of my list of spending cuts if I were in charge of the government here. Declassified files from the NSA showed that they were spying on all kinds of people like Muhammad Ali and Martin Luther King. We know that the FBI had constant surveillance on Martin Luther King, and they wanted to destroy him somehow because he was uniting the civil rights movement, and he was putting a great deal of focus on that war in Vietnam. And they wanted him out of there, and they wanted a controlled opposition, meaning Jesse Jackson, to be able to take over the civil rights movement. Now, Udall has unveiled a comprehensive bipartisan bill to reform the NSA surveillance programs, and it sounds really kind of good until you realize the NSA is already breaking the law left and right. So what's passing a new law going to do? absolutely nothing. And meanwhile, of course, the U.S. intelligence chiefs are lobbying Congress to prevent any limitations on their surveillance powers. By now, I'm sure members of Congress are getting those late-night phone calls, replaying recordings of their late-night sessions with Fifi's phone fantasies or whatever else it takes. And that is the real danger of an out-of-control intelligence apparatus that is spying on members of the government, because it will use what they find to blackmail that government. The FBI did it under J. Edgar Hoover. He was notorious for his private, secret files. And he even blackmailed John F. Kennedy using those things. We got to take a break for commercials. We got a caller waiting on the line, and we will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And speaking of the world of spying on Americans and backdoors and all the rest of this stuff, a very interesting article came out of Softpedia.com, and it's already being attacked, and they're saying, oh, this guy's not an expert, you shouldn't listen to him, which, of course, is why I decided I'm going to pay a lot of attention to what's going on. There is a freelance security expert guy by the name of Jim Stone, who has been looking very closely at Intel's new generation chips, and specifically the V-Pro CPU chip. And these chips have a built-in 3G radio link. It is separate from the 3G or 4G or Wi-Fi that is surrounding it in the computer or smartphone or tablet or laptop itself. This is in the chip itself. Now, Intel says that this 3G radio chip embedded in the CPU is part of its anti-theft technology. And this technology is found on every Core i3, i5, i7, and means that probably a lot of chips, not just the V-Pro, have this facility in there. Now, what Jim Stone claims to have discovered is that embedded with this 3G radio link is a second CPU with its own embedded operating system that appears to be completely disconnected from any processing that the CPU is doing for you, the end user, and raises the possibility that even when your device is turned off, that it could be accessed remotely through this 3G chip and use the second hidden CPU to basically turn it on and backdoor the whole system. Now, as I said before, I'm already seeing people come out and saying, oh, he's not an expert, this is nonsense, blah, 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 blah. But I think it's definitely worth buying one of these Intel CPUs and opening it up, and I know they're very difficult to get into because they don't want you peeking at their secrets, and just look at it with a microscope. Because if you understand how these chips are laid out, if there is a second hidden CPU in there, it'll be easy to spot. And in this day and age of the NSA backdooring absolutely everything, you cannot dismiss this report out of hand. Now, the U.S. government, or rather the corporate media, rather, is making a big deal out of this new proposed law in California called the Eraser Law that will allow kids in California to have the authority and ability on social media to erase their online past. Because, you know, kids are on social media, they're sending photos of themselves doing goofy things, sexting messages. I mean, if you go out on search engines, you'll just find all these pictures that, you know, young girls love to send back and forth, you know, of themselves partially clothed. And, you know, as they grow up, they kind of want those things to go away. And it's notoriously difficult to erase your history in social media. And this new law in California would basically have an erase button mandated for kids and presumably adults to go back and say, I want to take back those embarrassing pictures of last Christmas office party. And I'm sure it's very reassuring that people are going to say, I can restore my privacy, until you realize that this eraser button is confined to Facebook and MySpace and YouTube and all these other things, but does not have any impact on the NSA's databases. So this is a law designed to create the illusion of some kind of control of your privacy, but will not, in fact, protect your privacy from that party that we should be most concerned about, is invading our privacy, which is the NSA. Now, up in Canada, there's been a big brouhaha over the ads that were put up about Rethink 9/11. And we had Richard Gage on our show back here when they were just launching that. And there's been, of course, a lot of screaming and crying coming from Israel's supporters that these posters are anti-Semitic, even though Richard Gage and artists and architects and engineers from 9/11 Truth do not say who brought down the World Trade Towers. They don't assign blame, pointedly. That's not their agenda. They are there to merely point out that, yes, these buildings were deliberately, intentionally brought down from within, especially building number 7. So these ads have been running. They've been all over the United States of America, and they're up in Canada, and they're having an impact because apparently Canadians, the latest poll in Canada is showing 51% of poll respondents agree that Building 7 looks like a controlled demolition. 44% are saying there has to be a new investigation. I actually disagree. I don't need a new investigation. I've satisfied myself. We know what happened on 9/11. What does a new investigation do? It gives the government another opportunity to spend tax money to try and polish the lies a little bit more. We know the government lied to us. And really, in the long run, that's all we need to know, and that is what we, the people, must act on. The fact that this government lies to us about 9/11, Saddam's nuclear weapons, Assad's gas weapons, torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin, Spanish mines in Havana Harbor. This government lies to us, and the time has come for the American people to decide, will we live with a government that lies to us? Will we condemn our children to live under a government that lies to them as much as it has lied to us? The time is here to make that choice. Getting back to the poll in Canada, 54% of the poll respondents believe the ads about Building 7 are protected by free speech. Apparently 19% of the poll respondents, and this includes all these Israel supporters, are saying these ads shouldn't be allowed. We should not allow any kind of public display that questions the official story about anything. Now, over at the United States Senate's own website, they are starting to push that idea that the Second Amendment to the Constitution does not, in fact, confer an individual right for the people to keep and bear arms. In fact, this is a direct quote. They have the Bill of Rights, and then they have their little commentary. And right next to the Second Amendment, they say, quote, whether this provision protects the individual's right to own firearms or whether it deals only with the collective right of the people to arm and maintain a militia has long been debated. No. The only ones pushing this idea, this interpretation, this twisting are the gun grabbers. The United States Supreme Court already ruled in District of Columbia versus Heller. The Second Amendment confers an individual right to keep and bear arms if for no other reason than all the other amendments in the Bill of Rights confer individual rights. Now, under U.S. law, the militia is divided into two portions. The organized militia, which is the National Guard, and the unorganized militia, which is everybody else. And common sense has to tell you, in a nation where the police are simply not doing the job of controlling crime, especially up there in Chicago, the Second Amendment guarantees to we, the people, an individual right to keep and bear arms equal to, if not superior, to those in the hands of the criminals. And the criminals are getting all these assault weapons from Fast and Furious, from down in Mexico. And I would like to add a comment here. I would like to remind the U.S. government that the Constitution and the Bill of Rights is not federal property to change and tinker and reinterpret at will. The Constitution belongs to we the people. It says so right at the top. And we the people reserve the right to decide for ourselves what it means. That Constitution and the Bill of Rights are the original contract with America. They are the rules under which we the people allow the government to manage this nation for the benefit of the nation and we the people. And anyone in Washington, D.C. who doesn't want to follow those rules is welcome to resign effective immediately. The government is not the ruler of this nation. We the people are. The government is a hired caretaker that we entrust with the keys to the facility so that they can keep the floors swept, the windows washed, and the trash cans emptied. They are our employees. And they don't get to renegotiate the contract. We do. It's our Constitution, our Bill of Rights. We decide what it means. And we should be on guard for them trying to weasel word their way around those protections that remain for the American people. Another article in ActivistPost.com going on and on about how Dianne Feinstein is basically trying to turn freedom of speech into a government-issued privilege by altering the proposed media shield law to exclude what she describes as basement-dwelling, pajama-clad bloggers with no professional credentials. I think she means me. We'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to the last segment of our show today. And apparently the U.S. government is trying to fire back at Russia's growing body of evidence that the Syrian rebels, the hired mercenaries, actually carried out the August 21st attack. And the spin is getting pretty desperate because apparently, from what somebody was just sending me here, the White House spin is that Russia's entire case that the mercenaries carried out the attack is based on conspiracy theories they got from the Internet. Because the White House knows that anything found on the Internet is complete nonsense, and you should always trust what is being handed to them by the Israeli intelligence services. As ironclad, good as gold, we should never question. But again, and this is all over the Internet, because I put it there, the original claim makes no sense. The official U.S. government story is that Assad allowed UN chemical weapons inspectors into Syria, and on the very day they arrived, launched a chemical weapons attack against women and children of the Alawite sect, who are Assad supporters, virtually in front of those UN inspectors. And remember what I said. The fastest way to detect a government lie or a media lie is look for what should be there and isn't. And what should be there and isn't is a motive for Assad to do something that stupid. Gassing his own people achieves no military objective. Gassing his own people destroys his own popular support among his own population. Gassing his own people in front of UN chemical weapons inspectors opens the door to a potential U.S. military intervention, which is what Assad is trying to stop. There is no reason for Assad to have done this. There's plenty of reason for the hired mercenaries to have done it. And yes, you can read that bit of logic on the Internet. And the White House attitude is, oh no, we don't see the Internet, we don't hear the Internet, we have our own belief, we have all this proof from Israel, that's all we need to launch another war of conquest. So no wonder Dianne Feinstein and other members of the Congress are trying to find that some way they can shut down the independent media. Because they miss the good old days when they could just come up with any pile of USDA choice bovine excrement, feed it to the American people, and you would swallow it and throw your money and the lives of your babies onto the designated enemy. But those days are gone. Those days are gone. Speaking of the Internet, I mean, considering how the government disses the Internet, they certainly like to take advantage of it. There's a very interesting story out of dailycaller.com where, according to Twitter analytics, 37% of Michelle Obama's Twitter followers are fakes, manufactured. And yes, there are companies you can go to and say, I need a bunch of Twitter followers to make it look like I'm important and famous, and they'll generate Twitter followers. And in the case of Michelle Obama, nearly 2 million of her Twitter followers have been judged as phonies. 35% of the followers are inactive. They're not actually reading her tweets. Only 28% of her claimed followers occasionally look in and see what she actually has to say. But she's doing better than her husband, because over at Newsmax.com, they have another analysis saying that 53% of Obama's Twitter fans are also fake. And apparently he's got the record. Obama has a distinction of leading all American politicians with the most Twitter fans who don't actually exist. Now the story over at MarketWatch.com, 20% of Yelp reviews are fake. All these online sites where people are posting, things, reviews on stuff, and you'll see these glowing reviews. Oh, this was great. This is wonderful. Well worth the money. And they're being hijacked by public relations companies and manufacturing companies. And one of the worst offenders is RottenTomatoes.com, which was originally supposed to be a fan site for movie fans to go in and review movies. And several times I've gone in there and I've seen these glowing reviews about a new movie, which are written as if they're written by people who write press reviews for a living. They don't sound like real people saying, wow, I had fun, it was great. They wax flowery about it, and, an impressive and thoughtful telling of blah, 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 blah. And then you go see the actual movie, and it turns out to be a turkey. Now, before we get to the top of the show, I want to remind everybody, tomorrow in our third hour, Claire's not going to be with us. She's working on a top-secret project for WhatReallyHappened.com. But we're going to have Michelle Rosen. We've already put up a video at WhatReallyHappened.com, the FBI to make an announcement on the Tylenol murders. And Michelle Rosen is the daughter of one of the people who were killed in the Tylenol murders. And she and this co-author, Scott, have a book out, and they have been pursuing this case. And it's dragged on for 3 decades now. And the development, the announcement by the FBI, is a rather interesting twist on the story, and I'm not going to give it away. You're just going to have to tune in tomorrow and listen to Michelle. But it's, what can I say? It's classic FBI. And if you understand what my view of the FBI is, that's going to tell you all you really need to know. Meanwhile, apparently, Google, which is all buddy-buddy with the NSA and the government and doing all the government's work, they get all kinds of special privileges because apparently NASA has been selling surplus fuel for Google's private jets at a discounted rate. In other words, your taxes buy fuel stores for NASA. NASA says, well, we don't really need all of this, and they sell it to Google for their private jets at a discounted rate. Why not return that fuel to the American public for civil aviation? I understand Google's got a lot of money. They don't need a discount. They don't need special treatment, but they're all buddy-buddy with the NSA here. By the way, if you have upgraded your Apple device to iOS 7, you might want to be very careful about using the mapping application. Now, I use Navigon, which works really, really well, but the new iOS does have its route finder in the built-in mapping application, and apparently up in Alaska, it caused quite a bit of consternation because the mapping application was leading drivers to drive across an active airport runway. There were 2 incidents where cars were on the runway while airplanes were taking off or landing. People were just listening to the phone saying, turn left, turn right, and they weren't really paying attention. But you've got to be very, very careful. And yes, listen to that mapping application on your Apple, but pay attention to the sign saying, do not drive here. Meanwhile, this is a story out of IntelliHub. Apparently in New York, finally, Nikola Tesla got himself a monument, as he richly deserves. He's one of the great unsung geniuses. And recently the courts finally conceded that Tesla invented radio, and that Marconi's device, which was funded by the Seagrams people, I might add, did inappropriately steal Tesla's patented technology to invent radio. So Tesla finally got his monument. And he was an amazing, amazing genius, invented all kinds of new motors. I mean, half of our technology for our power distribution goes back to Nikola Tesla, because after he and Edison had their falling out, he went over and he worked for George Westinghouse. And so alternating current started with Tesla. And it's about time he got some recognition. One final story, because we're almost at the top of the show, and this is kind of a weird story, and we're back to the carbon Nazis. The BBC is running a story with the headline, "Half of Global Warming Man-Made," and an exhortation that we must do something, and yet they're admitting in the body of the article that the new IPCC report admits the Earth has not warmed in the last 15 years. So if we're responsible for half of global warming, 1/2 of zero is zero. And yet they're still out there screaming about carbon taxes and carbon credits. They're just trying to keep this scam going any way that they can. Oh, the warming is on vacation. It's hiding in the ocean. It's lurking in the bushes. It's coming back the instant you stop paying your carbon taxes. That's it for our show. We're going to get on out of here and get something useful done with the rest of the day. And yes, the inevitable exhortation, please go over to Republic Broadcasting and hit that donate button. This is a fight for the future of our republic. We don't get money from the government. We don't get money from large advertisers. We are the People's Radio Network, and only you, the people, can keep us on the air. Buy your silver and gold from Republic Trading Group. See you tomorrow. Aloha, America.